Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the long-awaited sequel to the 2016 animated Disney film, Moana 2. This movie stars Auli'i, Cravalho, and Dwayne Johnson as Moana and Maui once again facing off against a new threat in the ocean that is attempting to keep the people of the ocean apart. And as I'm sure most of you all know, this movie was originally intended to be a series on Disney Plus before it was reworked to be a film releasing in theaters this weekend. And as a financial decision from Disney, this is the smartest thing that they possibly could have done, because this movie is easily going to make $1 billion in the box office. Is going to be extremely successful, but was it a smart artistic decision on the part of the studio? Well, that is what I'm here to talk about here on the channel with Moana 2, with full spoilers. So if you have not had a chance to watch this movie in theaters just yet, and if you did enjoy this movie, I do think that even though this movie is, generally speaking, a step down in almost every single way, it is still a fun and serviceable enough sequel that's is fine to watch in theaters, especially as a family movie. So like I said, if you haven't seen the movie, go check it out in theaters and come back here and let's just jump right into this movie with what this film is actually about, because it starts off with Moana essentially going off to a bunch of different islands out in the ocean to try to find more people out there in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. And she stumbles upon this one island that has this artifact that hints at this one island called Motu Fetu. At one point in history, this island acted as a centerpiece where all the people of the ocean could come together as one united force, and this god named Nalo essentially wanted to sever the ties between all these people, because he knew that if these people were able to work together, then he wouldn't be able to defeat them, essentially. So if you take this island and sink it to the bottom of the ocean and protect it with this massive storm, then these people will never be able to rise up against you in one, strong force. And that is essentially the theme of this movie, which is Moana and all these other characters that go on her adventure with her this time around are essentially going to learn to work together to be able to defeat this insurmountable force that is this storm covering over this sunken island. And as a main general theme to this movie, I think it does progress pretty well after the first one, because obviously Moana knows now who she is after the events of that first movie. That is the theme of that movie, which is a story essentially of self-discovery, of figure out who you are and going off on this mass adventure to be able to define you as a person, whereas this movie is about that person who has already defined herself learning how to define the people as a whole. And I think that this, as a continuation of those similar themes, does work really well. I think the dynamic of the team in this movie is really solid. Joining Moana on the adventure this time around are 3 new characters that we get to meet in this film, one of which is named Moni, who is essentially the Maui superfan. This is a guy who essentially aspires to be like Moana in that first film, which is to go on some vast adventure in the ocean to meet his hero Maui and to essentially save the world. And when he finally gets an opportunity to do that in this film, he realizes that he's very afraid of all these situations of peril that he faces throughout the course of this movie. You also have Moana's best friend named Loto in this movie, who is a perfectionist. She's the one who built all the canoes for Moana on all her adventures out to sea. And because she is a perfectionist, she is going to, build all these amazing boats, but thinks that it's not good enough, so she's going to break those boats and rebuild it in a better way, and is going to be continually evolving her designs as the movie goes on. And it's going to be a very manic and crazy performance that she has in this film, which was probably the most entertaining of all these new characters. I think that she gave the comedic relief that was kind of missing from The Rock from that first one, because The Rock doesn't really show up until a little bit later on inside of this film. And so you have Loto to be able to be the person directly next to Moana, to have that comedic relief, to have that energy of this, very entertaining character that is going to bounce off of Moana throughout the entirety of this film. And then you have Keke, who is the farmer of the group, essentially to make all the food for their journey so they don't have to eat fish the entire time, which is to say that he doesn't really have too integral of a role here in this movie. He was at least fun in the musical sequences, because this is a guy that refuses to partake in any of the singing and dancing. So specifically when it comes to the What Could Be Better Than This song, which was essentially the team building song, which was actually probably my favorite song in this movie, mainly because it doesn't really have a direct equivalent to anything in that first movie. This is the song that kind of stands on its own as something that is unique and original to this film itself, because these characters are unique and original to this film. And so this song was a way to kind of bridge the gap between all these characters, to have Moni join on board singing along, to have Loto joining on to sing along, to eventually having Keke join in at least in the dancing portion of the song, even if it's against his will, in a very fun way. But by the end of the film, this guy eventually gets on board and has fun, joining this team by the end of this journey. And then of course there is the animation, which is just as beautiful as it was in the first film, which is to say that the environments are gorgeous. The character designs and the character animation, the way that they emote and the way that they play off of each other, and the physical comedy that there is inside the animation itself is very good. But when it comes to anything in this movie that is just as good or better than that first movie, that is pretty much it. I really like the team dynamic. I like the new characters. I like the main theme of this movie, and obviously the animation is gorgeous. But I think the biggest problem with this film is the fact that it is just kind of a blueprint copy of that first movie when it comes to the structure of this movie, the beats of this movie. There is pretty much every moment in this movie has an equivalent to that in the first one. I will praise Auli'i Cravalho for her voice work inside of this movie because she is perfect as the voice of Moana. Her journey and her character in general is such a relatable character to follow, especially in that first film, and it carries through in this one. And in that first one, you have the great song How Far I'll Go, which is easily one of my favorite Disney songs of all time. I don't think I've mentioned it yet in this review so far, but Moana is my favorite Disney movie of all time. And if you go ahead and check my Letterboxd, I have more specific and personal reasons as to why that movie is my favorite of all time. But when it comes to this character's journey in general, the How Far I'll Go song is very good. In this movie, you have an equivalent to that song, which is the song called Beyond in this movie, which is basically the same thing as How Far I'll Go, but not as good. And that's pretty much what I can say about everything inside of this movie. Every single song, every single emotional beat, every single plot point has an equivalent to that of the first one, but it's just not as good as that first one. So you have How Far I'll Go versus Beyond. Obviously, How Far I'll Go is better. You have a song from Dwayne Johnson's Maui in this movie, whereas the first one you have You're Welcome. This song you have Can I Get a Chi-Hu, which is a fun song in and of itself, but it's not going to be as catchy or as iconic as that of You're Welcome inside of that first one. And inside of that first movie, you had the entire sequence where the characters get trapped inside of that cave and encounter this crab when you're trying to, get the hook back for Maui. And this scene has a very similar sequence where you have Moana and the group get eaten by this clam character, which, kind of swallows them all whole. And at the very bottom of this clam, you have Maui was tied up in there. And so it's kind of a rescue mission to kind of rescue Maui. But then there's a force that kind of was keeping him there, which was this bat lady who is, fun in this movie. And she gets her own little song. But it was very much a similar feel to the crab sequence where this character is only in this one scene and doesn't really have an impact beyond that. And then the characters finally reach their destination. They face the giant threats at the end of the film. And there's a reprisal of the song earlier in the movie, which was How Far I'll Go in that first one. And now you have Beyond get a reprisal in this one. You get some emotional beats there. And it's pretty much the exact same movie structurally as the first one. And that's not to say that Abigail Barlow and Emily Baird did a bad job writing the songs of this movie. I do think that the songs inside of this film are fun. They're just not as iconic and memorable and doesn't have as clever wordplay that Lin-Manuel Miranda had inside of that first one, because his songs in the first film are so incredibly clever. The You're Welcome song is, as iconic as it is for a reason. How Far I'll Go is such an emotionally resonant song for me versus, Beyond in this movie is just not quite as strong. And so I do think that they would have done better if they tried to do something a little bit more, unique for this film itself instead of trying to, recapture the magic of that first movie, because that is what the best animated sequels or just sequels in general do, is it doesn't try to retread those exact same beats as the first one. It tries to expand the lore. It tries to, change the story structure. It tries to, do any of these number of things to expand the themes or to bring the characters on a new type of journey, to face a new threat. And those things just didn't happen in this movie, even though they were honestly hinted at. There are two plot points in this movie that I think were massive missed opportunities for this movie in order to, I guess, stand on its own and to be a little bit more unique than that of just a retread of the first movie. And those two things are the villain of the story and the sister. So let's talk about the villain first, which I guess kind of the villain of this movie is Nalo, who is the god that, brought that island down to the bottom of the ocean, essentially severing the ties between all the people of the ocean. But you don't actually get to see him in physical form until the post-credit scene, because yes, these gods do have a physical form in some way, but within this movie itself, it is kind of, again, a retread of that first one, where you have Tafiti in that first movie who turned into that lava monster as a physical threat, the obstacle that the characters had to overcome. But really, once they figured out who they were and they had the confidence in themselves to get around this monster and to, embrace Tafiti and to give that heart back to her, and then she was able to lay down. She wasn't necessarily the villain of the story. She was just an obstacle that was in the way of these characters from essentially finding out who they were and finding out what they needed to be in order to accomplish their goals. And that's essentially what's Nalo is inside of this movie. He's basically just this giant storm cloud that is shooting down lightning onto our main characters, and it's just an obstacle that our characters have to face in order to realize that they need to work together in order to get through this thing, in order for Maui to realize that it is not, all on him. He needs to be able to trust Moana to be able to do her thing instead of being so afraid of losing this friend of his inside of this very dangerous and very perilous journey that they have to be on. And so once our characters are able to reach the end of their arc and they're able to realize that they need to work together to, defeat this obstacle that is placed in front of them, they're able to do so. And yes, you do get a great moment with Moana essentially dying at the end of the film after being struck by the lightning, after, reaching back down to the bottom of the island. You have all her ancestors, show up around her to essentially will her back to life, and she gets a tattoo, and there's a lot of beautiful stuff inside of the ending of this film. But I think that they needed just a physical form of an antagonist, because this does still feel like a bit of a retread of their first one. Like I said, there's a lot of beautiful visuals there. There's a lot of great meaningful moments inside of that scene in and of itself. But I do think that having an actual presence of a villain villain would be a lot more interesting, because that character, the Bat Lady, earlier on in this film was kind of pitched to be the villain of the story, especially with one of the opening scenes. And so I was very intrigued by the idea of the character of Matangi, this character who, captured Maui at the beginning of the film and was kind of set up as a mystery as to what her actual motivations were for doing this at the beginning of the film. And when you finally do get this sequence in the middle of the movie with her song Get Lost, it was a very fun sequence, and she's a very interesting character because you couldn't quite tell if her motives were, selfless or if it was selfish, because she was trapped and cursed by the same character that our heroes were essentially going against to break this curse that would essentially set this character free. But you have to ask yourself, why was this character trapped and cursed here to begin with? And does, unleashing this character create a larger issue than the actual threat that we were facing in this movie itself? And maybe if, they defeated Nalo at the very ending of the film and they stepped foot on the island, and then maybe this character showed up at the very end was the actual threats of this story, and you have like another 20 minutes to deal with her as a threat, and maybe, sprinkled her presence a little bit more throughout the film. I think that could have been a lot more of a differentiating factor between the first film and this one, is to have her be the actual main antagonist of the film. And yeah, sure, it's teased at the very end of the film in the post-credit scene that, Nalo is a physical form, and you have Matangi go up to him, and you have these characters, and even including the crab in the first one, are all characters that have been wronged by Moana in some sort of way, essentially forming possibly a team of antagonists for Moana to face inside of the third film. And so maybe we'll get that eventually, but again, I think the film that we got itself inside of this one was just kind of a retread of those exact same beats, and I do think that the presence of an actual antagonist could have, added a lot more to the story. And then of course you have the biggest missed opportunity to me in this film, which was SIMEA, who was Moana's sister in this film, who was born between the events of the first film and this new one. And the dynamic between these two characters, as soon as I saw it on screen, I was like, God, this is absolutely gonna just kill me in this movie. If anything is gonna make me cry inside of this movie to get me have some sort of emotional connection to the story, it is going to be the dynamic between these two characters, because I think they really did a great job at setting up their relationship and setting up the idea that, this girl is going to be very sad when Moana goes out on this journey without her, and having the fear of, maybe she won't return from this adventure this time around. And there's a lot of really dire, stakes set up between her and her missing her sister at the very beginning of this film. And I love how they did utilize it throughout the movie. I wish it kind of did it more. There's one part in a montage where you see Moana kind of, splashing the water inside in the ocean, is giving a message to her sister back on Motunui, and it is a very cute and sweet moment. But I do think that her presence there on the boat, if they did, follow through with the idea that she, stuck into this little crate and she was planning on sneaking onto the boat to go on the adventure with them, but of course, Moana discovers her before they leave the island, and it stops her from doing so. And so it's just unfortunate that they didn't follow through, because I think if the sister was there on the journey itself, I think that dynamic again would have been really fun. But at the moment, at the end of the film, when Moana does quote unquote die, and you have all the ancestors surround her to bring her back to life, and you have Maui be the one who is standing above her and having that emotional connection between those two characters, I think if the sister were there either alongside Maui, or if it was just a sister there, possibly mourning the death of her sister, I think that would have had so much more emotional impact. Because I think even in the short amount of time that they explored that relationship at the beginning of the movie, it had so much more heart than the relationship between Maui and Moana did. And I just think that would have been so much better, because yes, you do have the really sweet reunion between her sister and Moana at the very end of the film, which did have some emotional impact for me. But I think if this character was throughout the entirety of the movie, I think it would have had a lot larger of an emotional impact. But that's not to say that any of these things are necessarily bad. Like I said, the songs are still fun. The adventure is still fun. The themes of this movie are still, good themes to have inside of a movie like this. But I think the movie just spends a little bit too much time on trying to be the first Moana movie than trying to pave its own path and to have an identity of its own, instead of, just trying to be, again, the first movie. And so by the end of it, I was disappointed by this movie, but that's also because this movie was never going to live up to the expectations that I had for a Moana sequel, because that first movie is my favorite Disney movie, because that first movie has a lot more of a personal, emotional connection that I have in my own personal life, which again, you can check out my Letterboxd to see more specifics on why the first Moana movie is my favorite movie of all time. I kind of split it all out there on my Letterboxd, so you can check that out as well, along with, other reviews that I have for other movies that I don't talk about here on the channel. But all that is to say that this movie was a disappointment, but it is still a perfectly fine movie to watch with your family on this Thanksgiving season. So I don't know, that's just my thoughts on this movie. I'm very curious to hear what you guys thought in the comment section down below. Were you disappointed in this film? Did you like this film? Or did you love it just as much as the original one? Or did you just straight up hate this movie from beginning to end? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And also, my question off for you guys is, did it feel like a Disney Plus series crammed into a movie? Because in some ways I can see some people seeing that, but also the first movie played in little vignettes like this movie also does, because the structure is exactly the same as that first one. So even that first movie I feel like could play as a series if they wanted it to be a series in general. And so I didn't think that necessarily impacted the movie all too much, although I think if they expanded it into a series as it was originally intended and the characters had a little bit more time to be developed, I do think that it would have been maybe a little bit better. But also, you know, they wouldn't have got all the money from the box office that they're going to get from this movie inevitably. So I don't know. I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts on this movie in the comment section down below. And if you did enjoy this review, make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I just reviewed Wicked, which was a lot of fun to talk about that movie here on the channel. And also Gladiator 2 was a lot of fun as well. And Y2K, I believe, releases next weekend. So I will be talking about that when it releases in theaters. And I'm just very excited to keep on talking about movies here on the channel for you guys. So like I said, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.